In 1943, Winston Churchill famously called Italy the soft underbelly of Europe. It's a fantastic turn of phrase, evokes images of a quick, decisive punch that would topple the whole Axis regime. The problem is that underbellies aren't typically protected by the Alps and the Apennine Mountains. This particular underbelly had a spine made of solid granite, ribs of fortified concrete, and was defended by some of the most stubborn soldiers in the German army. So, less of a soft belly and more of a geological nightmare filled with people who very much wanted to shoot you. The plan was brilliant, assuming your map of Italy was completely blank except for the word spaghetti. The whole adventure began with Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. On paper, it was a massive success, one of the largest amphibious landings in history, a huge Allied force hitting the beaches. But it immediately became a stage for a personal feud between America's George S. Patton and Britain's Bernard Montgomery. They raced to the city of Messina, not necessarily to beat the Germans, but to beat each other. While they were busy measuring their strategic egos, the Axis forces performed a logistical miracle, evacuating over 100,000 experienced German and Italian troops, plus their equipment, to the mainland. So, we won an island, but handed the enemy a perfectly preserved army to fight later. Fantastic start. Then came the moment the Allies were banking on. Mussolini was overthrown, and Italy surrendered on September 8, 1943. Champagne corks must have been popping at Allied command. The war in Italy was over, except it wasn't. The Germans, who are nothing if not efficient, initiated Operation Achse. They flooded the country with their own troops, disarmed the entire Italian army, and took over. Italy's surrender didn't remove a combatant from the field. It just removed the speed bumps. The Allies were no longer fighting to liberate Italy from Italians and Germans. They were now fighting to liberate Italy from Germans who were now dug in everywhere. The man in charge of ruining everyone's day was Field Marshal Albert Kesselring. He looked at the Italian peninsula with its endless mountains and river valleys and saw not a country, but a series of perfect defensive lines. He turned Italy into a layered death trap. The first, and most notorious, was the Gustav Line. It was a masterpiece of military engineering anchored on the Rapido River and the towering monastery of Monte Cassino. Add in the autumn rains, which turned the ground into a bottomless sea of mud, and you have the perfect recipe for a static, miserable meat grinder of a war. The soft underbelly was now a wall of mud and steel. The battle for Monte Cassino lasted for 5 agonizing months. The Allies threw everything they had at it. After repeated failures, they became convinced the Germans were using the ancient Benedictine Abbey as an artillery observation post. So, on February 15, 1944, they dropped hundreds of tons of bombs on it, reducing the priceless historical site to a pile of rubble. A truly brilliant tactical move, except for 2 tiny details. 1. The Germans weren't actually in the abbey. 2. The rubble created the single greatest defensive fortress they could have ever wished for. The German 1st Parachute Division promptly moved into the ruins and held out for another 3 months. An absolute triumph of turning a problem into a catastrophe. While the Cassino stalemate was chewing up lives, the Allies tried to be clever with Operation Shingle. The plan was to land troops at Anzio, behind the Gustav Line, and cut off the Germans. And the landing on January 22, 1944, was flawless. Not a German in sight. The road to Rome was wide open, a golden opportunity. So naturally, the American commander, General John Lucas, decided to wait. He cautiously built up his beachhead, giving Kesselring just enough time to panic, recover, and then rush every spare unit he had to surround the landing zone. The force, meant to be a dagger in the German rear, became a self-inflicted wound, a trapped pocket that had to be rescued at enormous cost. They had planned for a lightning strike and instead created a lovely seaside internment camp for themselves. By May 1944, the Allies finally broke through the Gustav Line. The German 10th Army was in full retreat. This was it, the chance to encircle and annihilate them, potentially ending the Italian campaign right there. But the American commander, General Mark Clark, had other ideas. He saw a choice between a war-winning strategic victory and being the first guy to enter Rome. He chose the photo op. Clark ignored orders and diverted his forces towards the undefended city, allowing the bulk of the German army to slip away. They paraded through Rome on June 4th, got their headlines, and ensured the Germans could retreat in good order to set up their next impenetrable defensive position, the Gothic Line. The war would now drag on for another year. But hey, the pictures looked great. Just 2 days after the triumph in Rome, the D-Day landings happened in Normandy. And just like that, Italy became yesterday's news. All the attention, the best troops, the new equipment, all of it went to France. Italy was now officially a sideshow. The soldiers left fighting there were sardonically called D-Day Dodgers by folks back home, implying they were avoiding the real war. This was, of course, deeply insulting to the men still dying in the mountains against some of Germany's best troops. They were a forgotten army, composed of soldiers from over 20 countries, including Brazil, Poland, South Africa, and India, fighting a brutal war for objectives that no longer seemed to matter to anyone else. A truly international lesson in being ignored. With the Germans dug in on the Gothic Line, the winter of 1944 arrived, and it was a miserable repeat of the year before. Progress stalled completely. The Allies faced the same problems: impassable mountains, freezing weather, and a determined, well-entrenched enemy. Logistical lines were a joke, with supplies having to be carried up mountainsides by mules. Morale was in the toilet. The soldiers were fighting for every river, every hill, every stone farmhouse, knowing that just over the Alps, the main event was happening without them. It was a campaign defined by brutal repetition. The only thing that changed was the name of the defensive line they were pointlessly throwing themselves against. Finally, in the spring of 1945, with the war in Europe clearly in its final weeks, the Allies launched one last major offensive. They finally broke through the Gothic Line and poured into the flat plains of the Po Valley. With their mountain defenses gone, the German forces in Italy collapsed. They formally surrendered on May 2, 1945, just 6 days before the final victory in Europe. After 600 days of brutal, grinding combat and over 300,000 Allied casualties, the soft underbelly was finally secured. It was a victory that tied down German divisions, but at a cost that still makes historians argue. A shortcut that turned out to be the longest, hardest, and muddiest road imaginable. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!